It was meant to be another calm morning on CBS Mornings. Fresh coffee, easy smiles, and polite conversation. But when Prince Harry took his seat across from Tony Dokoupil, the atmosphere shifted. What began as a cordial chat quickly unraveled into one of the most uncomfortable interviews the show had ever aired. One that would end with the Duke walking off set, leaving stunned hosts and dead silence behind. Sunlight spilled through the Manhattan skyline, bathing the studio in gold. Tony Dokoupil, known for his calm composure and easy charm, straightened his notes as the cameras rolled. "Good morning, America," he began smoothly. "And good morning to our special guest, Prince Harry." The Duke offered a faint smile, posture perfect, gaze steady, the look of a man long accustomed to being watched. "Pleasure to be here," he said, his tone polite but hollow. Tony chuckled softly. "We appreciate you making the time. Let's start simple. How's life in California treating you?" Harry leaned back, crossing one leg over the other. "It's peaceful," he said after a pause, long enough to sound less than sincere. "When you've spent your life surrounded by chaos, you start to appreciate silence, even if some people mistake it for isolation." Tony nodded thoughtfully. "You've traded royal duty for a quieter life. What's a typical morning like for you and your family?" Harry smirked. "I'm not sure typical applies to me, Tony. My mornings aren't about routine. They're about freedom, something not everyone's had the courage to chase." Tony's co-host shifted in her seat, sensing the tension brewing. "Freedom," Tony echoed carefully. "That's a powerful word. Do you ever miss any part of royal life? The tradition, the duty, the connection?" Harry's lips curled into a thin smile, but his eyes stayed cold. "Duty is a word people use when they want to control you. Tradition is the rope they tie around your neck while smiling for the cameras." The air in the studio grew heavy. Tony hesitated, cards trembling slightly in his hand. "That's quite a statement," he said softly. "But your family, your father especially, would say duty gives their lives purpose." "Purpose?" Harry scoffed. "My family's purpose has always been survival. Image management. The illusion of service wrapped in designer suits and polished press releases." Tony exchanged a brief glance with his co-host, then pressed on, still calm. "You've built quite an image of your own since leaving. The documentaries, the book, the public speaking. What drives you now?" Harry's smirk returned. "Truth," he said simply, "and independence. I don't have to ask anyone's permission to speak anymore. That's what terrifies them." Tony's polite smile faltered for a beat. "So you feel you were silenced before?" Harry leaned forward, elbows on the table. "Silenced, manipulated, framed, take your pick. The monarchy runs on whispers and headlines. I just stopped playing the game." Tony nodded slowly. "You mentioned family earlier. How are things between you and your brother these days?" Harry's jaw tightened. "That's private," he said curtly. Then, after a pause, "But let's just say some relationships don't survive when truth enters the room." Tony softened his tone. "Fair enough. And Meghan, she's faced enormous scrutiny, too. How do you both handle that pressure?" Harry gave a short, humorless laugh. "Handle it? We rise above it. People underestimate her. She's not just a royal wife, she's a woman with purpose. Maybe that's what unsettles people. A woman who refuses to bow." Tony nodded, attempting to steady the mood. "There's been talk, pure speculation of course, about new projects with Netflix. Perhaps a new season of your series." Harry's eyes narrowed. "Speculation?" he repeated, his voice like ice. "That's your world, Tony. Mine is reality." Tony chuckled lightly, though his tone wavered. "Just doing my job." Harry leaned back, voice cool and cutting. "Your job seems to involve asking about money and gossip. Maybe try asking about meaning once in a while." The tension was now unmistakable. Tony's co-host stepped in gently. "We're just curious what's next for you both. Our viewers love hearing about family and growth." Harry's response was instant, sharp. "No, they love drama. That's what keeps shows like this alive, isn't it?" The studio fell silent. Even the cameras seemed to hold their breath. Tony glanced toward the control room, then back at his guest with a polite, measured smile. "Well," he said slowly, "we try to focus on perspective, not spectacle." Harry gave a dry laugh. Perspective is just spectacle with better lighting. Tony smiled through it, though his fingers tightened subtly on the table's edge. The CBS Mornings studio suddenly felt less like a friendly chat, and more like a duel under soft lights. After the break, the studio glow seemed harsher. The hum of the cameras was louder, or maybe it was just the silence between questions. Tony straightened, his tone smooth and steady. We're back with Prince Harry, continuing our conversation about his life, his work, and what's next for him and his family. Harry gave a brief nod, a faint smirk tugging at his lips. Yes, he said dryly. Always a joy to be publicly dissected. Tony chuckled. We'll try not to dissect too much. Let's talk about your work. You've spoken often about mental health and emotional honesty. Do you feel your message has been heard the way you intended? Harry leaned forward, fingers laced, his gaze sharp. I think people hear what they want to hear. Some nod along because it's fashionable to care about mental health now. Others dismiss it because it's easier to mock a prince than face their own pain. That's fair, Tony replied evenly. But some critics say your interviews often sound like confessions mixed with accusations. They say you come across angry. Do you think that's fair? Harry's eyes narrowed. Anger is what people call truth when it makes them uncomfortable. Tony nodded slowly. But sometimes how truth is delivered affects how it's received, doesn't it? Harry's smile was thin. You mean I should smile more while talking about being hunted by tabloids? Maybe crack a joke? Tony matched his tone lightly. You're talking to a morning show host. I'm all for a little humor. Harry didn't laugh. Humor's a privilege, Tony. It belongs to people who've never been chased through tunnels or vilified in headlines. The words landed hard, cutting through the set's practiced calm. Tony's co-host shot him a warning glance. Careful. But Tony didn't flinch. I'm sorry if any of my questions feel intrusive, he said, voice steady. It's not my intention. But when you publish a book, release documentaries, speak openly about family dynamics, don't you also open the door to public curiosity? Harry leaned back, scoffing. Public curiosity is just voyeurism with better PR. You're all desperate to peek through the window, then act offended when I close the curtains. Tony let the silence stretch. Then, softly, that's an interesting metaphor, but I don't think curiosity and intrusion are always the same. Viewers care about your story. Do they? Harry shot back. Or do they just enjoy watching a royal rebel burn bridges? Tony exhaled slowly, his smile taut. You might be surprised. I think many people genuinely want to see you happy. Harry gave a sharp, humorless laugh. People want to feel like they're supporting something noble. It's emotional consumerism. Buy a cause. Feel better about yourself. Isn't that a bit cynical? Tony asked. Cynicism, Harry replied without missing a beat, is realism with better vocabulary. Tony blinked, irritation flickering across his calm exterior. He straightened his cards. All right, he said tightly. Let's pivot. There's been a lot of speculation about your Netflix partnership. Some reports suggest the next season of your docuseries is delayed. Creative differences, maybe? Or that you and Meghan requested a higher production fee. Any truth to that? Harry's jaw flexed. I'm amazed how obsessed the media is with money that isn't theirs. Tony smiled faintly. So, that's a no? Harry's voice was laced with mockery. That's a none of your business, Tony. Tony chuckled, trying to diffuse. Fair enough. I asked because people are curious. People are nosy, Harry interrupted. Let's call things what they are. Tony's co-host jumped in softly. We're just exploring the story from all angles, Prince Harry. Nothing personal. Harry's reply was cold. Everything's personal when your name sells headlines. Tony placed his cards flat on the table. His voice was still calm but firmer now. Then let's take headlines out of it. Let's talk about you. Where do you see yourself in 5 years? Harry tilted his head, that familiar smirk returning. 5 years from now? Still doing what I do best. Forcing people like you to ask better questions. The studio went still. Tony's co-host blinked, uncertain whether to laugh or move on. Tony gave a slow nod. All right, he said, voice clipped but composed. I'll take that as motivation. Harry leaned back in his chair, clearly savoring the unease in the room. "You should," he said coolly. A little introspection never hurt anyone. Tony's professionalism began to fray. Just barely, but enough to show through the cracks. "Let's talk about your mother, if that's okay," he began gently. "You've often said she was your inspiration, that she taught you empathy. Do you think she'd be proud of how outspoken you've become?" Harry's smirk faltered. For a brief moment, emotion flickered in his eyes, then hardened. "My mother would understand," he said quietly. "She knew what it meant to be misunderstood." Tony nodded slowly. "And do you ever worry about being misunderstood yourself?" Harry's tone chilled. "I don't lose sleep over opinions formed by people who only read headlines." The air thickened, an electric silence settling over the set. Tony adjusted his notes, his patience beginning to thin. "All right," he said softly. "You've spoken about valuing privacy and authenticity. Do you think doing multiple high-profile interviews helps or hurts that goal?" Harry's reply came sharp as a whip. "Privacy isn't silence, Tony. It's control. I decide what I share. That's the difference between me and the media circus." Tony nodded, voice calm but firmer now. "That's fair. But would you say there's a balance between controlling your story and overexposing it?" Harry leaned forward, his tone edged with condescension. "Balance is what people talk about when they're too afraid to pick a side." Tony's co-host glanced nervously toward the director's booth. Tony forced a calm smile. "That's certainly one way to look at it," he said evenly. But as the segment ended, the air in the studio was heavy. No laughter, no small talk, just tension, thick and humming like a storm gathering over still water. After the next commercial break, the transition music faded and Tony Dokoupil's signature morning show smile returned, tight, practiced, and barely holding. Behind it, his composure was stretched thin, like a rubber band about to snap. Across from him, Prince Harry lounged comfortably, an almost regal arrogance radiating from him. "Welcome back to CBS Mornings," Tony began, his tone smooth but cooler now. "We're continuing our conversation with Prince Harry, discussing his projects and, of course, his evolving relationship with the public eye." Harry gave a restrained smirk. "That's a polite way of saying controversy, isn't it?" Tony chuckled lightly. "You could say that, though I think most people are just curious. You've reinvented yourself several times since leaving the royal family. Would you say you've found peace now?" Harry's lips twitched into something between a grin and a sneer. "Peace is a funny word, Tony. It's usually used by people who've never had to fight for their own identity." Tony scribbled something on his notepad. "That's fair. Still, some might say you've spent years fighting against ghosts, institutions, traditions, expectations. Do you ever feel like you're still running from something?" Harry's eyes hardened. "Running? No, I'd call it escaping. There's a difference. Running implies fear. Escaping means freedom." Tony nodded calmly. "Interesting distinction. But in escaping, do you think you might have alienated people who once supported you?" Harry leaned forward, voice sharpening. "People who supported me? You mean the tabloids that tore my mother apart? Or the institution that stood by and watched?" Tony lifted a hand slightly, trying to ease the tension. "I mean the public. The people who admired your family, who grew up watching you." Harry gave a hollow laugh. "Admiration is just obsession with better lighting. The same people who adore you today will destroy you tomorrow if it sells." Tony kept his composure, but his tone grew more pointed. "Do you think that cynicism makes it harder for people to connect with you?" Harry's voice dropped, cold and final. "I'm not here to be relatable, Tony. I'm here to be real." The silence that followed was absolute, thick enough to make every camera operator shift uneasily in their seat. Tony drew a breath, his voice quiet but firm. "You've talked before about protecting your family from the kind of media intrusion that affected your mother. Yet you've done documentaries, interviews, and books. Do you see how some might find that contradictory?" Harry's eyes narrowed. "Contradictory? No. Hypocrisy would be pretending to care about truth while profiting from lies. I think you'd know a thing or two about that." Tony blinked, subtle, but enough to betray a crack in his practiced calm. "That's an interesting accusation," he said evenly. "But I'll remind you, I'm not the one being interviewed." Harry gave a small dismissive shrug. Maybe you should be. Tony's smile tightened. The warmth was gone. All right, he said, voice lower now. Let's talk about Meghan. You've both faced criticism, some unfair, certainly, but some say your actions invite the attention you claim to despise. Do you ever reflect on your role in that dynamic? Harry leaned forward, voice edged with arrogance. You mean, do I take responsibility for existing? For being visible? For daring to speak when silence is more comfortable for everyone else? Tony shook his head. No, I mean how you've handled that attention. When you speak publicly about your family, like now, it naturally invites a reaction. Harry smirked. Maybe if the truth didn't bother them, they wouldn't react. Tony exhaled slowly, patience thinning. You know, I've interviewed a lot of high-profile figures. Prince Harry. Few seem so determined to turn every question into a confrontation. Maybe you're just not used to people challenging your shallow assumptions, Harry shot back, his tone laced with mockery. A low murmur rippled through the crew. Tony's co-host glanced nervously from offstage, unsure whether to intervene. Tony's smile vanished. I think we're just trying to have a civil conversation, he said firmly. That's what this platform is about. Harry folded his arms, leaning back. Civil? You mean scripted. You ask what you think people want to hear. And when I don't play along, you call it rude. Tony sat back as well, his tone controlled but colder. No, I call it defensive. There's a difference. Harry tilted his head slightly, eyes narrowing. Or maybe I'm just not interested in your tabloid-friendly framing. Right, Tony replied, nodding once. Because asking about your life, the one you've made public through a dozen interviews and a memoir, is now off-limits. There's a difference, Harry snapped, between sharing my story on my terms and being dissected by people pretending to care. Tony's voice finally hardened. And yet you chose to come here, didn't you? No one forced you to sit in that chair. The air grew heavy like static before lightning. Harry's jaw tightened. Maybe I thought this would be a real conversation, not another ambush disguised as empathy. Would you like to take a quick break? A co-host called from off-camera. Tony waved it off, eyes locked on Harry. No, I think our viewers deserve honesty. He leaned in slightly. You talk about empathy, Prince Harry, but the way you speak to people, especially those offering you a platform, doesn't exactly reflect it. Harry let out a cold laugh. Maybe you confuse empathy with obedience. Tony's reply was quiet, sharp as glass. And maybe you confuse honesty with arrogance. Silence. Even the hum of the studio lights seemed to vanish. For the first time, Harry looked caught off guard. His lips parted as if to respond, but nothing came. Tony straightened his notes, composure settling back like armor. We'll continue this conversation after the break, he said tightly, staring straight into the camera. The red light dimmed. Harry stood abruptly, rubbing his temples, muttering under his breath. Tony stayed seated, eyes on his notes, but not reading. The silence between them was deafening. Everyone in the studio, camera ops, producers, sound techs, knew what came next wouldn't just be tense. It would be explosive. When the cameras came back on, the air was thick enough to cut. The lights felt hotter. Tony Dokoupil sat upright, pen tapping against his notepad, while Prince Harry returned to his seat, a quiet defiance in his posture, like a man who'd decided this wasn't a conversation anymore. It was a battle. Welcome back to CBS Mornings, Tony said, forcing a polite smile that didn't reach his eyes. Tony, we've been speaking with Prince Harry about life, family, and the realities of public scrutiny. Let's pick up where we left off. Harry crossed one leg over the other, hands clasped loosely. Sure, Tony, but let's be clear, this isn't a conversation. It's you trying to frame me the same way the media always has. Tony's jaw flexed, but his tone stayed even. I'm simply asking questions, Harry smirked. Right. And my role, apparently, is to sit here while you twist everything into a headline. Tony gave a short, humorless laugh. Prince Harry, you've given dozens of interviews, written books, hosted podcasts, made documentaries. Are you saying everyone else got it wrong too? Harry's eyes flashed. I'm saying everyone else wanted to get it wrong, Because angry prince sells better than a man who left a broken system. Tony leaned forward slightly. So everyone's the problem except you? Harry's voice sharpened. I didn't come here to be psychoanalyzed, Tony. If you want gossip, call my brother. He's better at smiling for cameras. Off camera, a producer's voice whispered through Tony's earpiece. Stay calm. Keep going. Don't lose him. Tony ignored it. Let's talk about your family then, he said quietly. Your relationship with your father. Is there any communication these days? Harry gave a bitter chuckle. Oh, so you can run another headline about a fractured royal bond? My family had decades to care. They didn't. Tony sighed, his patience thinning. I'm not asking to stir drama. I'm asking because people genuinely wonder if there's hope for reconciliation, Harry snapped. The public's curiosity is not my responsibility. A long silence followed. Tony set his notepad down, his voice now calm but firm. You know, Harry, you talk a lot about privacy, but you've built an entire brand around staying in the spotlight. It's hard to say you're escaping the media when you keep walking into interviews like this. Harry froze, jaw tightening. So now you're questioning my integrity? Tony met his glare evenly. No, I'm questioning your consistency. Harry laughed under his breath, shaking his head. You journalists all think you're clever, asking the same recycled questions like it makes you profound. Snap. Tony's pen cracked in his hand. The sound echoed faintly through the studio. He set the broken pen aside and exhaled through his nose. Look, Tony said, voice low but steady. I've interviewed world leaders, soldiers, scientists, people who faced pressure you couldn't imagine, and none of them talk down to others the way you do. Harry's smirk vanished. Excuse me? Tony's tone hardened. You act like the world owes you sympathy. Like you're the only one who suffered. But you've lived in palaces, flown private jets, had every door open for you, and still, you sneer at anyone who dares ask a question. The studio went utterly silent. A sound engineer hovered over the mute button, unsure whether this was career suicide or television gold. Harry straightened, his face reddening. You think privilege protects anyone from trauma? You think you can measure pain by access? Tony shot back instantly. No, but I think gratitude should come with it. Harry's eyes widened. Gratitude? For what, Tony? For being born into a cage painted gold? Tony leaned forward slightly, his voice cutting but controlled. For having a platform, and choosing to inspire instead of insult. Harry stood abruptly. The chair screeched against the floor. This interview is over. Tony didn't flinch. Of course it is. Harry glared down at him, breathing hard. You don't understand a thing about me. Maybe not, Tony said calmly. But after today, a lot of people will. For a moment, Harry seemed on the verge of a retort. Then he turned sharply and stormed off set, his footsteps echoing down the hallway. The camera crew exchanged stunned glances. Tony adjusted his tie, looked straight into the camera, and spoke with quiet professionalism. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, we apologize for the abrupt end to that interview. Here at CBS Mornings, our goal is to foster open and respectful dialogue. But sometimes, that's not always possible. He paused, just long enough for the weight of it to sink in. Thank you for watching. The red light on the camera faded. Tony exhaled, his composure slipping for just a heartbeat. His co-host approached, wide-eyed. That was something. Tony gave a small, weary smile. Yeah, something tells me that clip will be everywhere by noon. But as the studio emptied, Tony Dokoupil just sat quietly in his chair, rubbing his temples. Because no matter how viral it would get, one thought lingered. He had just looked a prince in the eyes and seen a man completely lost inside his own crown.